Hi, everybody, and welcome to Exegetically Speaking, a podcast of the friends and faculty of Wheaton College, Wheaton, Illinois, and the Lanier Theological Library in Houston, Texas. My name is David Capes, and I am the Senior Research Fellow at the Lanier Theological Library and a former dean up there in Wheaton at the School of Biblical and Theological Studies. Our purpose in these podcasts is really very simple. We want to promote the study of biblical languages, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, so we can read the Bible more faithfully, study it more fully, and not just read it, but to live it. Joining me today on Exegetically Speaking is Dr. Chris Fresch, who is a lecturer in biblical languages and Old Testament on the other side of the world from me right now. He is at the Bible College of South Australia in Adelaide, South Australia. Dr. Chris Fresch. Chris, good to see you.
Good to see you too, David. It's really good to be here. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
It's been a long time since I've seen you, but you're looking good.
Thank you. Well, you are too.
Yeah, well, thanks. Been a while. I'm not sure about that, but we'll see about that. At any rate, you're a day ahead of me. I'm not sure why we're always in America one day behind, but it seems like we're always behind. You are the pace setters.
Yeah, that's right. Set the pace and then kind of let you guys know in the back what's coming. And
we'll catch up eventually. We'll catch up eventually, right? So tell us, how did you get started reading Greek and Hebrew and biblical languages and stuff like that? How did that happen?
Yeah, so fun story. My sophomore year of college, of university, I took first year Greek, and I had this professor. His name was David Capes.
Really?
Yeah. He was quite a guy.
Never heard of him.
And well, David, you were just an excellent Greek lecturer, and you didn't scare me away, but you drew me in. So yeah, I took Greek that year with you, and then I just wanted to keep doing more Greek. So if I remember, this is a while back now, but because of the way my degrees worked, the biblical languages were electives for me. And so I didn't have space or kind of time to do upper level Greek stuff, at least not for credit. And so I talked to you about it, and I said, I really want to do these upper level Greek units. I want to keep going with my Greek, but I can't really take them because I've got all my other classes. And you said, well, just come along anyways. And that was huge because that meant I got to go sit in on more Greek classes, and I was in a community of other people reading Greek, and that just spurred me forward. And then that paved the way for me to do Hebrew in the final year of university, which then those two things together paved the way for me doing a master's in biblical languages right after that, which had been a degree that HBU, Houston Baptist University, had just developed.
We just started that when you were there. We had some great students in those days and afterwards and such. And you went on to work in linguistics as well at Cambridge.
Yeah, that's right. So the Masters of Biblical Languages really, really solidified for me my love for Greek and Hebrew and just how valuable they are and how much they're worth the effort we put into them. And then as a part of that too, there was a kind of a linguistics angle to the masters, which I found fascinating, just the value of modern linguistic theory and how we can apply that to the languages and our analysis of the text. And then I went and took that to my PhD at Cambridge and was using cognitive linguistics and functional linguistics in my work in the Septuagint, in the Greek translation of the Old Testament. So, yeah.
Well, one day we want to come back and maybe talk a little bit more about linguistics for those who might be interested, because that's kind of the next level, right, in some ways, of not necessarily of learning a particular language, but understanding language generally. Now, today we're going to talk a little bit about Genesis chapter 1, I think it's verse 31.
That's right.
And something that's going on there. Now, Hebrew is a language that you work in, but you also teach Greek as well, I guess,
I do.
Right?
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad that something that I did rubbed off on you. Good. I'm so glad you're still doing that. So tell us about what's happening in Genesis chapter 131, and then let's get into the text itself.
Yeah, sure. So Genesis 131 says the creation narrative, and throughout the chapter, of course, we've had God going through each day of creation and creating everything that exists. And in Genesis 1:31, we have God's final assessment, right? So throughout the days of creation, every day ends with, God saw all that he had made, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good. And so we have that kind of repeated refrain through Genesis 1. And Genesis 1:31 is the
I describe that as a liturgy. It's almost like a liturgy that's working it. I don't know if that's right or not, but anyway, that's another program.
I like it.
Yeah, but anyway, it's that refrain that keeps coming back. It's good, it's tov, it's tov, it's tov.
That's right.
But then in 131, what happens?
So in 131, you see God looked at all that he made, and then we get vahine tov ma'od. And so a lot of people talk about that here. Instead of just tov, good by itself, we get tov ma'od, very good. It was very good. So as a part of this kind of last final assessment of all of creation, it's not just good, it is very good. And that's a good thing to take note of. But a lot of people don't make note of the hine right there. And this is the first time we get hine in the narrative proper. God uses it in his speech earlier to the humans, but this is the first time in the narration that we get hine, and it's in this assessment of creation.
So what does the word hine mean? Well, first of all, what kind of word is it, and what does it mean?
So hine is a particle. And it's there to direct us as to how we're to understand what follows. It's telling us something about what's coming up. And so hine kind of traditionally would get translated as like behold. That's a pretty traditional translation of hine. Oftentimes it doesn't get translated at all because behold doesn't often work for it. It's not often a good translation. But it is this, basically it's this attention getter. It's saying, hey, listen up. What's coming is really important. It's noteworthy. And I want to focus your attention on it. I want you to pay attention to what's coming.
Now, the translation I'm looking at says, and indeed, it was very good.
Yeah.
It uses the word indeed there. It was just kind of like it does sort of reinforce that, I guess.
Yeah, a few translations will go with indeed, at least in places like this, especially where in like kind of a narration where hine is used, behold is weird because behold feels like an imperative to look at something, which if it's just occurring within the narrative itself, you're not really commanding the reader to look at something. So hine is really well suited to speech. So you'll get it a lot in dialogue where, hey, look at this, look over there. And that works really well, but in narrative, it's a bit weirder to translate and to make sense of. So indeed is maybe one way to try to get around it. I'm not sure that indeed works.
That's the best way. Yeah.
Well, I'm waiting for the day that our English translations will start using symbols or highlighting or something, because hine would work really well with a highlighter or an arrow pointing like, pay attention, or an exclamation mark.
Because there are no exclamation marks in these texts. There's no bold. Now, the next time that particular word hine occurs within the narrative itself is a few chapters over.
Yeah, that's right. In Genesis 6.
Genesis chapter 6. So tell us a little bit about that, what's going on there.
Yeah. So over in Genesis 6, verse 12. So Genesis 6 is the beginning of the flood narrative. And in Genesis 6, God is looking at the world and how things have descended into chaos and sin. And so in Genesis 6:12, we get hine again, and this is in God's assessment of the world now. And so it's interesting, between Genesis 6:12 and Genesis 1:31, we have a few kind of connection points. So Genesis 1:31 begins with Vayar Elohim, and God saw. And Genesis 6:12 begins with Vayar Elohim, and God saw. And then we're told what God saw in Genesis 1:31. He saw all that he made. In Genesis 6:12, he saw the earth. And then right after we get the object of the verb, what did God see? Then we get vahine. So in Genesis 1:31, vahine tov ma'od. God looked at everything he had made. And vahine, pay attention, look at this. Wow. Very good. Very good, right? Like this really draws attention to the final assessment of creation, and really just, draws the reader in to that kind of final word on the goodness of creation. And then in Genesis 6:12, God saw the earth, vahine, and pay attention, look at this. What's about to happen? It's ruined. And so we get this contrast between Genesis 1:31 and Genesis 6:12. And I think we are encouraged by the language used to see an intentional contrast being made here between the final assessment of creation and then the first assessment in Genesis 6:12, the first assessment of the world as it's become, which then leads to decreation.
I'm looking at another translation here, and I noticed that in that translation, the hine is not, in 6:12, is not translated at all.
Yeah.
It just says, and God saw that the earth was corrupt or ruined, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. So it's interesting how translators will choose to either demonstrate these things or not, right?
That's right.
To show these things or not. And in some cases, here it's just not there.
Yeah, that's right.
So how would you translate 6:12 of Genesis and that moment of, as you described earlier, of decreation?
Yeah, it really is a difficult word to translate. And as I talk to my students all the time, there's no one-to-one correspondence, or very rarely is there one-to-one correspondence between one language and another language, and we have to kind of work with what we have. There's always going to be things lost in translation. When I was talking to my Hebrew students just the other day, we were talking about hine, and my students are Australians. So I was talking about the difficulty of translating hine and trying to think of, what are some ways we can render it, listen up, hey, listen, pay attention, so something that's trying to get your reader's attention. And one of my students piped up and said, oh, what about oi? Which is such an Australianism. And that works really well in speech. Actually, I told him that's great. That's a very contextualized translation for the Australian English Bible, should one ever be made.
Yeah, and that's the way language works. There are certain things that really don't have meaning as much as they just grab attention. And that's what it seems like to me the hine is doing in both 131. Pay attention. God's creation was very good. Right? And then in Genesis 6:12, pay attention. God's creation has been corrupted.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's where we are. We're between Genesis 1 and Genesis 6. Great word today. Thanks so much for being with us, Dr. Chris Fresch. We'll have you back.
I'd love that. Thanks very much, David.
Thanks to Ian Rosine, Rebecca Larson, and Silvio Vasquez, who help us produce this podcast. Thanks as well to John Lansma, our Wheaton-based director, who makes this podcast possible. We're grateful to Phil Keggy for our music. If you want to study biblical languages, then you need to consider Wheaton College. Whether you're an undergraduate or a graduate student, we have amazing programs, our first-rate faculty, and some of the best students in the world. So go to the website, www.wheaton.edu, and look for modern and classical languages. Get started today. If you have questions about this or any of our podcasts, we'd love to hear from you. If you have suggestions or questions about any passage in the Hebrew Bible or Greek New Testament, send us an email and we'll see if we can get one of our experts to weigh in on that for you. Our email is exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. That's exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. Thanks for listening.